The gentle growl of the motorcycle engine was a familiar lullaby as Grace, a silver-haired biker widow with eyes that held the quiet wisdom of countless sunsets, rode the winding road back to her small garage. The cool afternoon wind, a constant companion, brushed against her face, a tangible reminder that freedom still offered refuge, even if, at times, it echoed with solitude. It was a freedom she had cultivated meticulously, brick by brick, after the world had irrevocably shifted on its axis. For years, Grace had found a measured solace in the rhythm of her days, tending to the intricate mechanisms of vintage motorcycles, polishing chrome until it gleamed with a borrowed light, and listening to the metallic symphony of tools echoing within the silent walls of her workshop. Each wrench's click, each sanding's whisper, was a small act of defiance against the overwhelming quietude that had settled after her husband's passing. Her garage, a sanctuary built of steel and memory, was where she felt most herself, most anchored. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light that streamed through the grimy windows, each speck a tiny, shimmering reminder of time's relentless passage, yet also of life's persistent, if subtle, motion. She ran a calloused hand over the cool, smooth fender of a half-restored cruiser, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. This was a motorcycle her husband had started, a project they had dreamt of completing together. It now sat, a beautiful, powerful relic, perpetually almost finished, much like a part of her own heart. The scent of oil and old leather clung to the air, a perfume of endurance and diligent work. Every morning, she would brew a strong cup of black coffee, the steam curling into the chill air of the garage, and trace the faded notes in a worn leather-bound journal. Her late husband's meticulous schematics, scribbled observations, and even a few half-finished jokes. It was her ritual, a silent conversation with a presence no longer tangible. She'd sigh, a soft expulsion of air, and then, with resolute hands, pick up the heavy wrench, resuming the slow, deliberate work of mechanical resurrection. Yet, despite the practiced routine, an underlying current of loneliness hummed beneath the surface of her existence. Society, in its hurried indifference, often rendered those like Grace invisible, a quiet backdrop against the vibrant, bustling foreground of youth and new beginnings. She had felt it acutely just a week prior at the regional auto parts store. A younger clerk, barely out of his teens, had dismissed her technical question with a wave of his hand, directing her to a generic aisle, his eyes already flitting to a younger, flashier customer. The slight sting of that dismissal, the sense of being unseen, unheard, settled deep within her, another layer of frost on an already cool landscape. She had simply nodded, a tight-lipped expression masking the quiet hurt, and left, the requested part remaining unpurchased. The world had become a place of fleeting glances and impatient tones, where her lived experience and quiet wisdom often went unacknowledged. Today, however, the familiar trajectory of her return held an unexpected deviation. As she parked her treasured machine, the engine cooling with soft ticks and pops, she noticed a lean, dust-covered dog observing her from a distance. Its ribs were faintly visible beneath its matted coat, and its eyes, a deep, hesitant brown, seemed to oscillate between primal fear and a flicker of desperate hope. It stood at the edge of the road, a shadow against the fading light, an embodiment of silent want. When she opened the creaking gate to her workshop, the animal took a few tentative steps forward, then paused, a breath held in the late afternoon air. "Hey there, big fellow," she murmured, her voice a low rumble, softened by years of quiet contemplation. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her lips. "I don't have much, but I've got some soup on the stove and a warm spot inside." The dog's tail gave a tentative wag, a hesitant flutter that spoke volumes of its ingrained caution, yet it followed her, a silent, hopeful shadow, into the mechanical sanctuary. Grace placed a shallow dish of leftover stew on the worn concrete floor, its savory aroma filling the space. She watched, a quiet observer, as the dog devoured every morsel, a primal hunger in its movements. For a fleeting moment, she saw a reflection of her own, unspoken need in its famished gaze, not for food but for care, for acknowledgement, for a connection that simply was. In the days that followed, the stray dog, whom Grace had affectionately named Rusty in a quiet nod to an old, corroded iron tank she could never quite restore, became an unwavering fixture in her solitary world. Each morning, just as the first tendrils of dawn stretched across the horizon, she would find him curled outside her gate, a silent sentinel waiting for the creak of its opening. He wasn't demanding, nor was he overly boisterous. His presence was a gentle, unwavering companion. He would pad softly into the garage, finding his spot under her workbench, his soft snores occasionally punctuating the methodical sounds of her work. He watched her with an intelligent, patient gaze, his head resting on his paws as she meticulously disassembled engines, cleaned carburetors, and polished chrome to a mirror sheen. Grace's hands, accustomed to the cold hardness of metal, slowly began to find comfort in the soft warmth of Rusty's fur. When she paused for a moment of reflection, a familiar sigh escaping her lips, he would nudge his head against her arm, a silent offering of comfort. It was a language without words, a bond woven from unspoken needs and quiet, unconditional acceptance. "You and I, Rusty," she'd often say, stroking his head, the coarse fur a familiar texture beneath her fingers. "Two unfinished projects, finding our rhythm in the repair." The phrase, a melancholy truth that once felt like a burden, now carried a lighter weight, tinged with a nascent understanding. She thought of the rusted tank, an emblem of past intentions never fully realized, and then of Rusty, who, despite his own signs of neglect, carried an unyielding spirit. She saw herself in both, a being with a past that bore visible marks, yet with a fundamental will to endure, to exist, to find beauty in the slow process of being made whole again. This quiet, consistent presence of Rusty began to subtly alter the landscape of Grace's internal world. Where once the silence in her home had felt vast and echoing, a stark reminder of absence, it now felt softer, filled with the gentle sounds of Rusty's breathing, the occasional clinking of his water bowl, the soft thud of his tail against the concrete floor when she entered. The scent of dog, earthy and warm, mingled with the familiar aroma of oil and gasoline, creating a new, comforting blend that spoke of shared space and quiet companionship. She found herself talking to him more, narrating her mechanical processes, explaining the intricacies of an engine part, or simply sharing a memory of her late husband as she worked on a particular bike. It wasn't a conversation expecting a verbal reply, but rather an unfolding of her inner thoughts, a release of words that had long been held captive within her own mind. One morning, while meticulously reassembling a vintage fuel pump, a task that required absolute focus and precision, she found her mind wandering less to the sharp edges of her grief and more to the gentle curve of Rusty's back as he slept. A flicker of something new, a quiet joy, surprised her. It wasn't a grand, effusive happiness, but a subtle warmth, like the first rays of morning sun after a long, cold night. She realized she had begun to smile more often, a genuine softening of her features that had been absent for far too long. These smiles were not performed for an audience. They were natural, organic responses to Rusty's simple, loving presence. Her neighbors, once accustomed to her solitary comings and goings, the quiet hum of her motorcycle being the loudest sound emanating from her property, began to notice the change. They saw her in her garden, now with Rusty trotting beside her, his nose sniffing at the blooming petunias. They saw her leaving for her rides, and Rusty, with an unexpected burst of youthful energy, would bark a farewell from the garage doorway, his tail wagging furiously. The woman who once seemed encased in a shell of quiet sorrow was subtly, almost imperceptibly cracking open. Her motorcycle's engine, once a declaration of solitary freedom, now echoed down the street, and Rusty always followed, a faithful, joyful shadow, his presence a visible testament to a life slowly recalibrating its rhythm. These were not grand, outward gestures of transformation, but rather tiny, internal shifts, like the minute adjustments of a delicate engine. Grace was not suddenly boisterous or overtly social, but her internal landscape was being gently re-terraformed. The sheer constancy of Rusty's devotion was a balm to the invisible wounds of social dismissal she had often experienced. He didn't care that she was an older woman, that her hands were marked by grease and time, or that her past held a profound loss. He simply saw her, Grace, the giver of warmth and sustenance, the steady presence in his uncertain world. In his eyes, she was not invisible. She was everything. And in that reflection, Grace was beginning to see glimmers of herself again, Not the woman she was before the loss, but the woman she was becoming, shaped by both enduring grief and burgeoning, quiet hope. The metallic clang of a wrench dropped to the concrete floor no longer resonated with the hollow echo of her own emptiness, but rather with the soft thud of Rusty's head as he woke, blinking slowly, offering his steady, silent companionship. It was a profound, unscripted connection, forged in the quiet heart of a widow's garage, a place where rusty metal found new purpose and a lonely soul began to mend. The silent partnership with Rusty, built on unspoken trust and shared solitude, slowly began to prompt Grace into actions beyond her usual, meticulously observed routines. Rusty's very presence, unburdened by the complexities of human expectation, nudged her towards a forgotten aspect of herself, the quiet joy of nurturing. One crisp morning, as she watched him shivering slightly in the early chill, despite the blanket she had provided, a gentle ache stirred within her. His lean frame, though improving, still carried the echoes of his past hardships. He didn't complain, simply endured, but Grace's keen mechanic's eye, always attuned to subtle imperfections and needs, recognized the deeper vulnerability. He needed more than just a blanket. He needed a true nest, a place that was unequivocally his, crafted with intention and care. This realization led her to an old wooden chest tucked away in the dusty corner of her attic, a place she hadn't ventured into since her husband's passing. The scent of cedar and aged fabric, of forgotten dreams and lingering love, wafted from its depths as she slowly lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled beneath layers of moth-eaten linens, lay a collection of her husband's old sweaters, soft and worn, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and the garage, as well as several carefully folded pieces of quilt fabric she had once intended to turn into a blanket for a future grandchild that never came. Her hands, usually so steady with a wrench, trembled slightly as she retrieved them. Each sweater, each swatch of fabric, was a tangible link to a past that had often felt too painful to touch. With a deep, cleansing breath, Grace pulled out her old sewing machine, a sturdy, cast-iron Singer that had belonged to her mother, now covered with a fine layer of dust. It had sat silent, a silent monument, to a different life, for years. As her fingers brushed over its cold metallic surface, a rush of memories flooded her. The hum of the machine, the rhythm of the needle, the quiet joy of creating something warm and useful with her own two hands. This wasn't just mending. This was creation, born from a need for tender care. With hesitant, then increasingly confident movements, she began to stitch together the soft wool sweaters and the colorful fabric scraps. Her fingers, once stiff with disuse, remembered the rhythm of the needle, the subtle tension of the thread. She was not merely sewing a bed, she was weaving together fragments of her past, transforming the remnants of loss into a new form of comfort. Each stitch was a tiny act of remembrance, a quiet conversation with the ghosts of her history, now imbued with a renewed sense of purpose. The immediate reward was profound. When she presented the finished, soft, multi-textured bed to Rusty, he approached it cautiously, sniffing it, the familiar scent of her husband's sweaters. Then, with a soft sigh of contentment, he circled a few times before collapsing onto it, burrowing his nose into the warmth. His eyes, usually alert, half closed in a state of pure, unadulterated peace. It was the purest form of validation Grace had received in years, a genuine, unfiltered expression of gratitude that bypassed words entirely. In that moment, watching him sleep soundly, wrapped in the repurposed fabric of her past, Grace felt a profound shift within her. The act of giving, born from a simple observation of need, had unlocked something deep within her own heart. It was a powerful, silent affirmation that she still possessed the capacity to nurture, to create comfort, to make a tangible difference in another living being's world. This activity, this quiet act of creation, unexpectedly began to transform her grief. The acute, sharp edge of pain that accompanied memories of her husband began to soften, morphing into a tender ache, a gentle nostalgia. The weight of his absence was still present, but it was now laced with the warmth of Rusty's presence. The quiet satisfaction of a forgotten skill revived. The sewing machine's gentle whir, a sound of creation, began to replace the internal echoes of loneliness. She found herself humming old tunes as she worked, her mind drifting to happier times, not with the familiar sting of loss, but with a quiet, appreciative fondness. It was as if Rusty, through his simple needs, had handed her a key to a locked room in her own soul, a room filled not just with sorrow, but with the quiet, potent power of compassion and creativity. Stop a moment. What talent of yours lies dormant, waiting for the right person to awaken it? Perhaps it is a skill you once loved, a creative pursuit, or simply a deep capacity for empathy you've kept hidden. Share that small magic in the comments, and consider how a seemingly insignificant connection might just be the spark you need to reignite it. The quiet awakening sparked by Rusty's presence and her rediscovered craft slowly shifted Grace's perspective, moving her from reactive care to proactive compassion. It wasn't merely about mending a dog's bed. It was about mending her own internal architecture, piece by deliberate piece. She began to observe not just Rusty's physical needs, but the deeper unspoken rhythms of his days, and through them, the rhythms of her own world. She noticed his keen interest in the children who occasionally walked past her garage, their laughter echoing down the street. She also observed the subtle, tired slump of the young delivery driver, Elias, who often left packages at the edge of her property, his movements betraying a weariness that went beyond physical exertion. Her own experiences with unspoken loneliness allowed her to sense these quiet currents in others. One afternoon, a small, worn teddy bear tumbled from Elias's delivery van as he hurried past, clearly unnoticed. Grace saw it, a tiny, poignant detail in the flurry of his daily haste. Instead of simply picking it up and placing it aside, a thought, clear and insistent, formed in her mind. This was not just a lost toy. It was a symbol of someone's small comfort, now adrift. She felt a profound internal call to bridge that gap, to offer more than just a momentary solution. The letter she had found weeks ago, with its resonant words, "Not every loss is an end. Sometimes it's the beginning of something you needed to rediscover," returned to her. It wasn't just a sign. It was a quiet instruction, an invitation to step beyond her carefully constructed solitude. The next day, when Elias stopped at her gate, Grace was waiting. She held the small mended teddy bear, now meticulously cleaned, and with a loose button restitched with her practiced hands, a small bow tied around its neck. "This fell from your truck yesterday," she said, her voice soft but steady, extending the bear. "Someone will be missing it." Elias's tired eyes widened in surprise, then softened with an unexpected gratitude. "My daughters," he murmured, taking the bear with a reverence that spoke volumes. "She's been heartbroken." He offered a mumbled, "Thank you," but Grace, observing his eyes, saw a deeper exhaustion, a silent battle against the relentless demands of his life. "Perhaps," Grace ventured, her courage a quiet, surprising force, "if you have a moment, I could offer you a cup of tea. It looks like you could use a pause." It was the first time she had proactively invited anyone into her world, a radical departure from her years of careful reclusion. Elias hesitated, caught between the urgency of his schedule and the unexpected warmth of her offer. "Just for a moment," he agreed, a small, weary smile touching his lips. As they sat in her small kitchen sipping steaming tea, Grace listened. She didn't offer advice or platitudes. She simply listened with an attentiveness that Elias clearly hadn't experienced in a long time. He spoke of his long hours, the struggle to make ends meet, the guilt of not having enough time with his daughter. Grace, remembering her own years of shared struggles and quiet victories with her husband, offered a gentle nod of understanding. This was the profound turning point. Grace was no longer simply mending motorcycles or sewing beds. She was mending frayed connections, offering the quiet sanctuary of her presence to a weary soul. The act of giving, she realized, was not about grand gestures, but about recognizing the subtle needs beneath the surface and offering what she genuinely had: time, quiet empathy, and the comforting ritual of shared tea. The simple act of mending a child's toy and then extending an invitation for a moment of peace forged a new kind of connection. The reciprocity began to blossom. Elias, feeling seen and heard, started to slow his pace when he passed her garage. He would wave, a genuine smile replacing his usual hurried nod. Sometimes, He'd bring her a small bag of fresh pastries from a bakery further down his route, a silent offering of appreciation. He started to share small details about his daughter's joy with the mended bear, and Grace, in turn, found herself sharing quiet anecdotes from her own past, moments of shared laughter with her late husband. Their connection, forged over tea and quiet understanding, slowly began to chip away at Grace's profound isolation, proving that her capacity for kindness, far from being diminished by loss, had been refined, becoming a finely tuned instrument of healing. The seed of her own restoration was being watered not by receiving, but by the deliberate, courageous act of giving. The quiet ripple of Grace's renewed purpose, initiated by Rusty and nurtured through her connection with Elias, gradually began to spread outwards, subtly altering the way her corner of the world perceived her. The once invisible biker widow, shrouded in a self-imposed veil of dignified solitude, slowly emerged into a gentle, more vibrant light. The change was not sudden or dramatic, but rather a gradual unfolding, like the slow bloom of a winter-hardy flower. Mr. Abernathy, the proprietor of the local hardware store, and a man whose hurried dismissals once stung Grace, was among the first to notice. He had always seen her as the old biker woman, a quiet, perhaps eccentric figure who bought specific antique parts without much chatter, but now he observed her differently. He saw her one sunny afternoon outside her garage, not alone, but sitting on a weathered wooden bench, a steaming mug in her hand, sharing a quiet moment with Elias, whose delivery truck was parked just outside her gate. Rusty lay contentedly at their feet, a silent guardian. Mr. Abernathy saw Grace smile, a genuine, unforced expression that transformed her face, and his initial surprise gave way to a flicker of genuine admiration. He watched as she passed Elias a small, neatly wrapped package, a batch of her homemade biscuits, he later learned. The scene, imbued with an unexpected warmth, challenged his preconceived notions of her solitude. The circle of connection continued to expand. The sweet, buttery scent of Grace's biscuits, shared first with Elias, then with a few other passers-by, began to waft through the neighborhood, drawing curiosity. Soon, an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, whose own health had made baking a challenge, shyly inquired if Grace might share her recipe or perhaps bake a small batch for a special occasion. Grace, with newfound serenity, not only shared the recipe but offered to teach Mrs. Henderson, spending afternoons in her neighbor's sun-drenched kitchen, patiently guiding her hands through the familiar motions. Her ability to mend, once focused on internal combustion engines, now extended to mending spirits and fostering community. There was a moment, subtle yet significant, when Grace visited Mr. Abernathy's store for a specific type of vintage washer. Instead of his usual hurried efficiency, Mr. Abernathy paused. "Heard those biscuits of yours are quite something, Grace," he said, a rare, genuine smile gracing his lips. He then spent an extra moment helping her find the exact part and even offered a small discount, a gesture of respect previously unextended. It wasn't a grand apology, but a quiet acknowledgement, a shift in his perception that resonated deeply within Grace. She met his gaze with a calm dignity, a quiet strength that belied her years, and responded with a graceful, appreciative nod. The subtle confrontation of her quiet dignity against his past indifference had, at last, disarmed him. Her symbolic object, the worn, leather-bound journal filled with her husband's mechanical schematics, also underwent a quiet transformation. It was no longer just a repository of his memory, a sacred, untouched artifact of loss. One afternoon, as she taught Mrs. Henderson the intricacies of a yeast dough, she found herself flipping through its pages, not for the mechanical diagrams, but for a handwritten recipe her husband had once jotted down, a simple, comforting apple tart that was his favorite. She copied it for Mrs. Henderson, the act transforming the journal from a shrine of what was lost to a living bridge of shared kindness. The old book, once a private comfort, now offered a new way to connect, to create new memories, gently bridging the past with a burgeoning, compassionate present. The subtle hum of her garage, once a sound of solitary work, now occasionally included the soft chatter of Mrs. Henderson or the quiet presence of Elias stopping by for a brief respite. Grace's world, though still centered on her mechanical sanctuary, was no longer a fortress, but a beacon, its light gently attracting those in need of quiet connection. She was no longer just fixing what was broken, but cultivating new growth, slowly transforming the landscape of her life and the lives of those around her, one gentle act of kindness at a time. The quiet strength she had always possessed, once turned inward to navigate her grief, now radiated outward, a warm, steady glow changing the very fabric of her existence. The ultimate test of Grace's burgeoning transformation arrived one mild afternoon, a day painted in hues of soft gold and gentle breezes. A pickup truck, weathered by countless miles, pulled slowly into her driveway, its engine sighing to a stop. A man emerged, his face etched with the lines of a life lived on the road, his eyes carrying a familiar blend of weariness and hope. It was Rusty's original owner, a long-haul truck driver named Frank, who had lost his beloved companion months ago, miles from home. Rusty, who had been curled in a patch of sun near the garage door, lifted his head, his ears perked, a low whine escaping his throat. Then, with a joyful bark that resonated with absolute recognition, he bounded towards the truck, his tail a blur of happiness. Frank, his voice thick with emotion, knelt and embraced his dog, tears tracking paths down his dusty cheeks. "Rusty," he murmured, stroking the dog's head. "I thought I'd never see you again." Grace watched from the garage doorway, a quiet observer. A familiar ache, deep and profound, settled in her chest. It was the ache of anticipated separation, a testament to the powerful bond she had formed with the stray. Grace remained silent for a long moment, allowing the reunion to unfold in its raw, beautiful sincerity. Her heart, which had swelled with Rusty's presence, now felt a bittersweet constriction. She knew with an unwavering certainty that came from her core that this was the right path. To truly mend, sometimes one must allow what has been found to return to its original place, trusting in the larger design. She walked slowly towards them, her hand calloused from tools, reaching out to stroke Rusty's head one last time. His fur was softer now, his ribs no longer so prominent beneath her touch. "Go on, boy," she whispered, her voice a little husky. "Fate saw fit to bring you two back together again." Rusty licked her hand, a soft, warm gesture of farewell, then turned and followed Frank into the truck. Grace watched them disappear down the road, the same path she herself had traveled so many times seeking solitude. The silence returned, not suddenly, but gradually, settling back into the garage. But this time, it did not feel empty. It hummed with a different resonance, a quiet fullness that spoke of growth, of gratitude, and of an enduring peace. The following morning, as Grace opened her garage, the morning light painting long shadows across the concrete, she noticed a small, neatly wrapped package on her workbench. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was a brand new leather collar, soft and supple, gleaming with a fresh metallic tag. Beside it, a handwritten note, its script a little rough, but clear. "Thank you for restoring faith, not just in my friend, but in people. You gave him what he needed, and then you gave him back to me. That's a rare kindness." "Frank," Grace smiled, a profound, tender expression that reached her eyes. She picked up the new collar, its scent of fresh leather mingling with the familiar aroma of her garage. She walked to a small wooden shelf above her workbench, where a faded photograph of her late husband sat, his smile warm and familiar. Next to it, she carefully placed the new collar. "I guess in a way," she whispered to the photograph, her voice soft with a new understanding, "I still keep fixing what time tries to break." That evening, as dusk bled across the sky, painting it in shades of lavender and rose, Grace mounted her motorcycle. The engine roared to life, a powerful, familiar sound, but it felt lighter now, imbued with a different kind of purpose. The wind, once a lonely companion, now carried a distinct, quiet peace, the peace of one who understood that the small, often unseen acts of kindness were the true, enduring fuel of the soul. She was not the same woman who had ridden into that garage weeks ago, burdened by silent grief. She was Grace, a woman who had allowed kindness to open her heart, proving that even after profound loss, life's deepest repairs often begin with the willingness to offer a gentle, mending hand to another. This was her soul's spring, a testament to the quiet power of a heart, choosing to bloom again, even amidst the persistent winter of grief. Grace's journey shows us that healing isn't about erasing the scars of loss, but about finding the courage to grow around them. to let new life emerge from the very ground where sorrow once held sway. She demonstrated that empathy, a watchful eye for the unspoken needs of others, and the willingness to offer a genuine piece of oneself are the most potent tools for repair. Her garage, once a fortress of solitude, became a crucible of connection, transforming not just stray dogs and weary souls, but the very fabric of her own existence. Her story reminds us that every act of kindness, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, sends ripples through the world, often returning to us in unexpected ways, profoundly altering our internal landscapes. It's a gentle nudge to recognize that the strength we seek is often found not in grand gestures of self-preservation, but in the quiet courage of extending ourselves, offering compassion, and allowing ourselves to be softened by the needs of another. This is the alchemy of the human spirit, transforming rust into resilience, solitude into shared purpose, and the echoes of absence into the symphony of new beginnings. It's a profound lesson in agency, the conscious choice to move from being shaped by loss to actively shaping a new narrative of hope and connection. If Grace's story watered something in you, if it sparked a quiet realization or stirred a forgotten part of your own compassionate heart, leave a bloom in the comments so we know you're here, listening and feeling. Tell us what small act of kindness, whether received or given, has reshaped your own journey. Share a moment when you felt seen, when your own Rusty appeared, or when your Elias needed a cup of tea. Don't let your own story of quiet resilience, of connection, or of rediscovered purpose wither in silence. Let it too bloom.